It has been some obscure amount of days for which I cannot remember the exact number since TCL sent me the TCL 30V 5G to test and review, and today I'm going to finally post that review. You may have seen on this channel that I already did an unboxing and a first impressions video. I also did a somewhat in-depth gaming video where I talk about and I show the performance of this device, but today I'm going to kind of bring it all together. If you do not know what this device is or much about it, here is the listing on Verizon's website. Verizon is where you are going to get this device. It is a Verizon exclusive. This device is going to run you $299 US should you buy it outright, but there are many different opportunities to get this device effectively for free or for about $8 a month over a 36-month term. If we jump over to GSM Arena for the specifications, we are dealing with a very large, relatively bright 6.67-inch display running at 1080 by 2400. So this is HD. A lot of times when you get these devices in this price range, you don't get full HD. You're going to be dealing with something like 720p, something in that range. Well, not here. Full HD, very, very large, very, very clear screen. On top of that, we've got a 50 megapixel primary shooter here on this rather large camera module, photo samples, and so forth coming shortly in this video. 4 gigabytes of RAM and a rather large 4,500 milliamp hour battery that when you pair that with this Snapdragon 480 5G capable processor, very important on Verizon, you get a phone that's going to last easily one day, and into that second day battery life has been very, very good on this device. I didn't mention the display is 60 Hertz, not going to get the high refresh rate, but again at this price, not that crazy. That also does aid in the battery life. When we talk about the cameras though, let's kind of break down the rest of the camera sensors. We do in fact have 3 cameras here. Like I said, the 50 megapixel main sensor, we have a 5 megapixel ultra wide and a 2 megapixel macro. If we quickly go around the device, obviously the screen, that's kind of the main selling feature of this thing. The bezels, even the chin, quite small. We have a hole punch selfie camera, which is 16 megapixels and actually produces pretty admirable results. I was pretty impressed with the selfie camera. Up top, we have a 3.5 millimeter headphone jack. Absolutely crazy. On this side, we have our volume rocker as well as a power button on the bottom, a couple of speakers, and a USB-C port. On this side, you have your SIM tray. I do also want to point out that the earpiece up here is an amplified earpiece so that you do get stereo audio when you're watching video or playing games. Great to have. There is your rather large camera module with your specifications there written on that, as well as a rear-mounted fingerprint scanner, which is actually quite fast. I'm going to be touching that scanner right now, and there you are unlocked. You can kind of get a sense there of how quickly that does unlock. I'm actually quite pleased with that fingerprint scanner. You also do have face unlock. So if I double tap it here, you should see down here, device unlocked by face, swipe up to unlock. So I can kind of demo exactly how quickly that works. Not too bad. Granted, it's not going to be as secure as something like an iPhone's version of Face Unlock, but it is there should you want to use it. So at this point, let's jump into the camera samples, because a lot of these budget phones, the camera is where things kind of fall apart a little bit. So let's show this now before we go any further. So this first shot is actually right over my shoulder here in this corner, and it's just a good area for color reproduction as well as overall detail. The colors look pretty accurate. Now this is using the 50 megapixel camera, although it does pixel bend down. So you don't get the full 50 megapixels unless you actually use a particular mode for that. Otherwise it just bends it down. I think it's like 12 and a half megapixels or something like that. If we zoom in here, let's get a look at the detail that is visible. We get a little bit of grain here and there and a little bit of loss of detail, but overall the picture from it, it's okay. If we switch to the wide angle, you get obviously a much wider angle. You see much more stuff in this image, but the graininess, the struggle with detail and so forth is extremely noticeable. This really looks like it was taken in a very, almost a dark room, and that is simply not the case. 5 megapixel camera, not the best in the world. If we go to the macro, you can get up very close to stuff, but you're really gonna wanna have good lighting because otherwise you get a lot of grain and it's kind of hard to focus, but it is there. Now, just in case you wanted to see what that 50 megapixel mode looked like, I will include a sample for that. This is, again, the standard 12 megapixel. Let's zoom in. Let's focus on some text here. I think you're going to be surprised at how little the 50 megapixel mode actually does. In fact, in some ways, it actually seems to be worse, which is a little bit confusing to me. The image is much, much larger. I will show you here on the side where this is in fact 49.9 megapixels versus 12.5, and I will tell you that the 12.5 megapixel version has a better quality image, more detail, strangely enough. Now with night mode, things are a little bit weird. So one of these pictures was taken with night mode turned on and the other one was with it turned off. If you can tell the difference, you're doing better than I can, because I can't, I'm skeptical that it was even activated because the shutter lag was the same on both. I'm not sure, maybe I'm doing something wrong here. I've used a lot of phones, a lot of cameras, not sure what I'm missing. Night mode, I'm not so sure about. Stepping into some better lighting, here is a beautiful rose in my backyard, and I love using flowers like this for photo samples because it really pushes a camera's ability to handle exposure and colors. And you can kind of see here, some of this gets a little bit blown out, but I mean overall, for a phone in this budget range, I think that it does a pretty admirable job here. And this was also a good opportunity to bust out that macro lens. And yeah, look, this is a 2 megapixel sensor, so it's not incredibly high resolution, but if all you're going to do is post this on Instagram, that's going to be totally viable. It's a little bit washed out, but look, use Google Photos, click that little button up there, go into your colors, and punch up the saturation a little bit, and you've got a much better picture. So very little editing needed to be done there. So for this next section, we're going to be bouncing back and forth, and I will tell you which camera is which, but we're going to be bouncing back and forth between the TCL 35G and kind of a weird choice, I know, for some of you that may not be familiar with this channel, but a Surface Duo 2. Now, there's two reasons why I'm testing it against a Surface Duo 2. This is going to make some sense. For one, I focus a lot on this channel on this particular device, and number two is most people don't think Surface Duo 2 has a phenomenal camera, okay? Most people seem to think the Surface Duo 2's camera is passable, mid-range at best, despite the fact that it is rather expensive. And I think it just makes a good benchmark, right? So I'm not going to test this thing against the Vivo X80 or the S22 Ultra. That would be overkill. But Duo 2 has three 12-megapixel cameras, and no one seems to think that they're absolutely incredible. So comparing a okay camera setup to this, I think does make some intrinsic sense. So this first image here was taken on the wide angle lens on the TCL device. And you can see here some weird grainy stuff going on down here at the bottom. The wide angle is a fairly weak sensor on this device. And it's, look, again, this is a 5 megapixel sensor, not a phenomenal sensor, but again, for social media purposes, it's not terrible. Going to the wide angle lens on the Surface Duo 2, you see it is a bit more contrasty, right? A bit more saturated in the colors. Look at the shadows here and the shadows there. Actually, Duo kind of crushed the blacks a little bit more. This is maybe a little oversaturated, and that might be responsible for the weird graininess going on there. So there's your jump back and forth between those two. On the standard normal 50 megapixel primary on the TCL device, this is a better image. It looks a little bit washed out. I swear to you that I did wipe off this lens, but it almost looks like a little bit of like haziness here. Might have just been the way the light was hitting the lens or something like that. But if we punch in, there's a decent amount of detail now that we've cleared up, right? Like that's not too bad. And again, if you were to go into Google Photos, and maybe the auto mode might actually be the way to go on this. Yeah, that punches it up quite nicely. And now I think we've got an okay looking image. On Duo 2, we're definitely brighter. We're definitely greener. Look at our shadows down there and the graininess. That's kind of cleaned up on the primary sensor. Let's zoom in and see if we get any better detail. Yeah, I think that we do. Let's look at the details on the branches here. Let's use that as a hallmark, and let's zoom in here. Definitely brighten that stuff up more on Duo and a little bit more detail. But again, this is not bad, okay? In good daylight, in good bright light, I think this is a passable image. And again, you could probably go in here and let's go to light, and can we find our highlights and bring them up a little bit? Can we find shadows? What I'm looking for. Like, can we bring those up a little bit? You could probably tweak this a little bit more and make it a more enjoyable image as you go. Now, let's kind of make things hard. We're going to digitally crop in 2 times. And here's where, you don't have a zoom lens of any kind. You have a macro instead. So this is what you would get zooming in 2 times. It is quite hazy for some reason. And then, of course, Duo has an actual optical 2x zoom lens. So really no comparison to be made there between those two. But again, because it's a 50 megapixel sensor, you can zoom in relatively admirably for a device of this price. But of course, it can't compete with something that has an actual zoom lens. What about the selfie camera? Well, I actually think it might be the strongest camera on the device. This is portrait mode using that hole punch selfie sensor. The beard hair test, if you will, I think it passes that relatively well. The bokeh looks okay. Granted, I have my hair pulled back, which makes it a little bit easier for it. But I think this is a pretty darn good selfie, if I do say so myself. If you turn off portrait mode, this is what you get. It's not quite as good. The selfie mode really does seem to really improve the image quality. So good job there by TCL. If we flip the camera around and we use the primary sensor, I think the fact that it detected a human, it really punched up the saturation, and I think that this looks pretty decent. Let's turn on portrait mode, and that's a pretty good portrait. That's actually pretty impressively solid. And there's also this other mode. There's a few tricks in this camera. One of them, it will actually highlight you and remove the color from everything but you automatically. This makes for a pretty cool profile picture or something like that. There's a lot of neat tricks here in this camera system. What about video performance as I walk through the backyard here? What do you think about the stability? What do you think about the audio, the focus, the colors, all of these things? Be paying attention to them. Make your own judgment about how the camera system shooting video looks to you. Okay, so hopefully you now have a pretty good idea of what the photography experience on this device is. But now, let's jump back into the overhead camera and let's just kind of open some apps, move around the interface, and see kind of how things perform in that regard. If we jump back over here, let's unlock this guy. Let's just open up some stuff. Let's open up the Google Play Store and see how quickly that does load and open. Not too bad. Scrolling through it is okay as things, do eventually load. It's a 60 hertz display, so, sometimes scrolling is a little bit iffy, but it's okay. Let's jump over to, let's do Instagram. How quick does Instagram load? Not too bad. Scrolling through Instagram, relatively smooth as things. I don't follow a ton of people, so I don't see a ton of stuff in Instagram. Let's go to Twitter and let that load. Let's go home, make sure everything is loaded. Oh, Carly feeding the possums. Can't blame you. Been there, done that. Let's scroll through Twitter. And there's a little bit of judder scrolling through Twitter as it tries to load things. No big deal, though. Relatively smooth and a totally overall fine experience. I did mention earlier that this is an amplified earpiece. So you do have stereo sound. So let's go to YouTube. And let's open up one of my own videos and let's have the volume kind of cranked up and let's let this play.
Do you guys want to talk about the Moto Razr? Do you want to talk about the new Moto Razr 3?
So as far as like the video quality goes, the screen looks really good. For this price point in particular, it's a very solid, detailed, colorful screen. The speakers, however, they are stereo. At maximum volume, you do get some distortion. And if I go to a track here on YouTube Music, let's just use what I had on here, which was Huey Lewis, I Want a New Drug, great band, great song. Let's let this play. You can probably hear how that is distorting a little bit. And if I once again use as my proxy a device that in this regard, speakers, it seems to be widely regarded as being okay, good, not great. Let's go and play the same track. I think you're going to be able to hear that it is a clearer, less distorted noise profile. But overall, this is loud and it's going to get the job done relatively well. Now, I did do a lot of gaming tests already. So I'm going to link here in the description and in the pinned comment my gaming test, because this thing actually performs pretty well gaming, and those stereo speakers do just fine in a gaming setup. I think I did PUBG Mobile, Call of Duty Mobile, and Apex Legends, and it handled each of them much better than I honestly expected. And I think that's pretty much all I've got to say about this device. Once again, if you're looking for something on the budget side, $299, probably free, maybe only $8 a month, it's a pretty solid option. Now, keep in mind, there are a lot of really good budget phones out there, so make sure you do your due diligence and look around at your other options before you make any purchase. That's just generally, broadly good advice, but I can honestly say that this thing is pretty solid. It's got a great screen, loudspeakers, a decent enough camera. Battery life is really solid. It feels quite solid. This isn't glass on glass. If you drop it, the back isn't going to necessarily just shatter like a lot of more premium phones will do. So I'm pretty happy with this thing. If you're on Verizon, you're looking for a budget phone, you could probably do worse than this. Thanks to TCL for sending that guy out for me to review. Guys, thanks for watching. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Maybe check out some of the merchandise down below this video. Perhaps I'll see you on the next one. And until next time, stay nerdy, my friend.